I want to welcome you to our Wednesday night devotional time. We're going to continue our discussion on family goals. This past Sunday, we talked to parents, and so tonight I have invited Meredith to come and spend some time with us so that together as parents we can talk to you all about the ups and the downs and the good stuff that we do and the mistakes that we make on a daily basis. And hopefully, as we continue this discussion and just sharing some tonight, we can find some encouragement and really hope for the future. Parenting's a tough job, and so I hope this will bless you tonight as we continue this discussion. We looked this past Sunday at really what's the goal? What's the target as parents? We really need to have a target, and a lot of times the influences that we're getting are coming from the culture and not from God. So we need the target for parenting as God defines it, and we discovered on Sunday that target is Christ likeness, and we looked at Romans 8:29, and this really isn't just for our kids. This is for all of us as children of God. And this verse in Romans 8:29 says, "For God knew his people in advance, and he chose them to become like his son." That is his plan for us, to become like his son Jesus. And so if that's his plan for us, that's the target. That's our goal as parents for our children. Is Christ-likeness. The ultimate goal for us is for our children to grow up and to act, to look, to think, to live and speak and love like Jesus Christ. And so if that's the target, then what's the method for Christ-likeness? And we talked about this on Sunday, and it's modeling this consistent example of our own behavior, showing them what that looks like in our daily lives. In other words, follow me, imitate me, be like me. And I said this on Sunday. That's a scary thought for us to say that. That if you want to become like Jesus, all you need to do is follow my example. But the Apostle Paul said that as a spiritual parent to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 11:1. He said, "And you should imitate me. I urge you," he said in another verse there in Corinthians, "I urge you to imitate me just as I imitate Christ." And so that's the idea, that as we as parents are following Christ ourselves, we're becoming more like Christ. We're dedicated to becoming more like who he is. Then by following our example, then our children in turn become like Jesus Christ. Look at my life, look at my actions, pray the way that I pray, give the way that I give, serve the way that I serve, love the way that I love, listen to God the way that I do, and you will become like Jesus. And kind of the sobering reality that I shared on Sunday was, we really can't impart what we don't possess. And so if we're struggling in this area, we need to stop right where we are and eliminate some of those negative things that we don't want to pass down to our children, see reproduced in the lives of our children. And then what are those positive things that we can do to become more like Jesus in our own lives? And then, so if we've got the target is Christ-likeness, the method is modeling, then what's the path? And we read Ephesians 6:4 to show us what the path was for helping our children become like Christ. "Do not provoke your children to anger by the way that you treat them. Rather, bring them up with the discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord." We want to avoid those things in our parenting that can exasperate and embitter and cause a rift in that relationship. That's not what God wants for us. He wants there to be this deep connection, this love relationship, this bond between us that allows us to discipline and instruct our children in his ways so that they become like Jesus. Discipline, I read this definition on Sunday. Discipline is teaching obedience to God and His Word through consistent consequences. Those are our actions that we take, and clear instructions. Those are the words that we use in an atmosphere of love. So consequent boundaries and consequences, clear instructions in this atmosphere of love. And really, that's so important for our kids, because this is the channel to God's blessing. This is the way that our children get to experience His best for their lives. That's why this is so important, passing on that discipline, that training and instruction that comes from the Lord. And so, if that's the path, and there are different parenting styles that are out there, what I really wanted us to talk about and look at tonight are, what's the best way for us to be able to do what we're talking about here, help our kids become like Christ, to model that and give them the discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord. And so what's the best way that we can do that?
So I think we've got the target on the wall. We know what we're trying to instill in our children, what we're trying to teach, what we're trying to, who we want them to be. But it comes down to, now, how do I pass this stuff along? When I model it, will they copy it? Will they imitate me? And so when we start thinking about that, I believe that we need to start looking at that bridge, that pathway between us and our children, which is our relationship with our children. And the way we parent has a direct effect on that relationship. And if we break down that relationship, we lose that connection. We lose that pathway that we're trying to send this information over. This modeling, this example will not connect with our children if we've broken down the relationship. And so we wanted to spend some time talking about different types of parenting styles, because certain types of parenting styles have a tendency to destroy relationship. And if relationship is that bridge that we're sending this information over, we need it. We need it to be strong. And so what type of parenting, what style of parenting, who are you? We want you to be able to identify kind of who you are. What is your default parenting style? And what is the most effective way to keep a relationship, to keep that bridge strong, so that we can model, we can hand down this information and this Christ-likeness that we want in our children?
Okay, so let's look at that slide of the 4 parenting styles. Really, there's really 4 that, we tend to fall into. And we really, Meredith and I were talking, a lot of times we kind of flow in and out of these even, but there is one that we really tend to gravitate towards. And, we do what we do because we think it's right. Really, it's usually what we saw growing up. Mm-hmm. It's the only point of reference maybe that we had. And so we think it's right because it's the one that we know. And so I want us to kind of take a step back, if we can, and examine these 4 styles and see which one is really the best way that we can, transmit this discipline instruction that comes from the Lord in an atmosphere of love that preserves that bond and gives us the best opportunity to really teach our kids what Christ-likeness is all about. And so let's kind of look at each of these separately. First of all, let's look at the authoritarian parent. Talk to us about the authoritarian parent, Meredith.
Okay, this is definitely my default. And I think for a lot of us, this is a common parenting style that people, at least in my age group, experienced, and even my parents experienced, was a very authoritarian parenting style. And the focus was more on obedience. I need you to just follow the rules. I have no tolerance for not following the rules. And you either obey me or there's a consequence. You obey me or there's a consequence. And it's just, that is what I grew up really knowing. And I think it's what our parents even grew up knowing. And so talk to us about what are the effects of that type of parenting?
Yeah, well, one of the things that really strikes me about the authoritarian style is, our main concern and what we'll fall into a lot of times is we're more concerned with punishment versus discipline. And what I mean by that, we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But with this idea of punishment, I'm looking for compliance.
Right.
And my focus is just on your behavior. I need you to pay for your mistakes and feel sorry for your mistakes versus how can I help you make better choices? That's the idea behind discipline versus punishment. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but the authoritarian style usually chooses punishment. You know, you just need to follow the rules. There's zero tolerance with very little warmth and nurturing happening. And some of the effects are kind of shocking as we were looking at this, you know. One of the effects is lying. If what you want is compliance, then I learned to really become a good liar to just, let you hear what you want to hear.
Right.
And so that was one of the effects.
And let me just say, that is one thing I've actually seen in my own children. I know I've been too much of an authoritarian when I start noticing that they're bending the truth to try to satisfy me. When I say, especially to the younger girls, did you do that? And their automatic response is no, 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 versus when I've done it well and I say, what just happened or what did you do? They'll say to me, in a repentant way, I hit her, versus just making something up to protect themselves. So we can even kind of see if that is who we are by some of these effects. If we're seeing these things in our children, it's possible that you might be an authoritarian.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
And just some of the other effects, aggressive outside of the home, lower self-esteem. They could struggle later with depression and anxiety. They want to conform. They tend to conform easily. They're not a leader. They become a follower. They can struggle with self-control, especially when mom and dad aren't there to monitor behavior. All of a sudden, when they're not around, I can just go crazy, and they can struggle with self-control. And so think about maybe is that your default, kind of where you land as a parent, and think about some of the effects that can cause. Let's move on to the permissive parenting style.
Okay, so the permissive parent just doesn't really enforce rules, and sometimes actually you may be a permissive parent because your parent was an authoritarian. A lot of times we mimic what our parents were, but sometimes we want to do the exact opposite. We say, well, that was awful and that didn't work, and I felt really controlled and overwhelmed by that kind of parenting. So let me do the opposite of that. Let me be permissive, and you just kind of, you don't really make a lot of rules. The kids kind of just do their own thing. You are more of their friend. You want to be their buddy versus being their parent. You rarely have consequences, or maybe you just don't follow through at all. Like I'll say, if you do this, this will be the consequence, and then I give another warning, and then I give another warning, and then I never actually get up and enforce the consequence. I mean, that is very permissive parenting, and there's not a lot of structure. We just kind of roll with our day, and that would be very much permissive parenting.
And some of the effects of the permissive parenting style, oftentimes there's a lack of self-discipline because, again, there's no structure, there's no rules, there's no enforcement of the rules.
Nobody's modeling that for me. I don't really even know how to have structure or self-discipline.
Right. So there can be poor decision-making. There could be more aggression, less emotional understanding, because again, there's no structure. There's no discipline that's happening, and so I can have very very little emotional understanding, which leads to aggression. And then this one kind of really struck me was later in life, a tendency for delinquency or substance abuse, because there's no understanding of authority.
Yeah, and no understanding of consequences. I have an action and there's no consequence to it. And so as I get older, there's not been consequences to my choices. So I'll try out some things because there's not previously been consequences. People may have said, well, there will be, but there wasn't. And so I don't see any consequences to my choices. And that type of parenting is actually a lot of what we see in foster kids. They're fairly, you would think that they're very authoritarian, but a lot of times they're very permissive. And so those children without structure kind of try out everything and don't really know how to react to consequences or to structure. They don't even know what to do in those situations.
How about the uninvolved? I think that kind of bleeds into the uninvolved parenting style as well.
And uninvolved is funny because I have this is my default. I'm the authoritarian. When I'm not paying attention, I can be kind of aggressive and do what I say right now. But then I burn out of that and I become the uninvolved parent. If you're not going to listen to me, I'll just kind of shut down. And so the uninvolved parent doesn't spend time with the kids very much. It's almost, I think, maybe overwhelming for them. So they just shut down or back away from the kids, turn on the TV and let them kind of do their own thing. They don't know where their kids are. And you'll see this more as the kids get preteen. Now, I think they're safe. I don't really know where they are. Maybe they're at the neighbors. I'm not totally sure, but they'll come home in a little bit. You don't really have any expectations or rules. You don't even really know what they got on their last report card. You don't really care necessarily. It'll all just work out kind of thing. And I think a lot of that sometimes comes from an overwhelmed feeling is, I'm not sure how to do all this, so I'm just going to step back and we'll just see how it plays out, I think. And I think for a lot of people, that's probably not intentional. It's just a default, really.
And some of the effects are not good of this parenting style. Our kids can be emotionally withdrawn. There's fear and anxiety. They can perform poorly in school. And again, there's an increased risk of substance abuse and delinquency. Again, with no involvement, with no structure, with no guidelines, no consequences. Unfortunately, those are the effects. Let's look now at the last parenting style that really through research has shown to be probably the best, what we should be maybe striving for as parents, this authoritative style.
And this, I think, on my best day when I'm focused, I can do this. And it is intentional. It is what I think would be best described as an intentional parent. Everything I'm doing is with the intention of an outcome. And so the authoritative parent is firm but compassionate. They have clear boundaries and they have consequences, but there's love with those consequences. And the consequences have a purpose. I am set out. I'm giving you consequences because I want you to become this person. I want this outcome. It's not just, I want you to stop behaving this way. There are long-term purposes that I want out of that. They have, we teach respect for authority by respecting our children. And it's really forming a deep connection with our children. You'll see these kids with the authoritative parent are more likely to be connected to their parent, to willingly say to their parent what's going on in their lives, what happened at school today. They'll share that without the fear of a consequence, without the fear of being ignored. They can share what they're feeling, share what's happened with their day, and they have a deeper connection with their parents.
So it sounds like, though, we're being too soft. For those who would say, this feels like too soft an approach. Talk to me a little bit more about that.
So it's not a soft approach. The consequences still are unpleasant, and that's okay. We want unpleasant consequences. We're not just trying to be a buddy and say, oh, you can tell me everything, and that's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is, I am making these rules for you to protect you. I'm spending more time explaining to you why. It's not just do because I said so. It's do because I want this outcome in you. I'm trying to teach you this thing. And so that's the thing about authoritative parenting is it is intentional and it is time consuming. It does take time. You won't just default to an authoritative parent because I have to think about when I make a consequence, well, what is the purpose of that consequence? What am I really trying to teach? And again, we're gonna move to that here in just a minute. But it does kind of sound when you're saying things, describing it, it can sound like you're just being really soft, but you're really not. There still are firm consequences, but I'm compassionate about those. It's not just just stop that behavior and I'll do whatever it takes to make you stop that behavior. It's stop that behavior because, and it's just that next step that requires more work and more explanation.
And some of the effects that have been shown from this style of parenting, better emotional health, more responsible, more empathetic, more resistant to peer pressure, because I've been able to use my own brain and thought processes to understand the choices that I make and the consequences of those choices, and then healthy respect for rules and authority. And so as we kind of look at these parenting styles, one of the things, I think I skirt between authoritarian and authoritative, and so I can kind of gravitate towards punishment versus discipline. I'm angry, I'm irritated, so I need to make you pay. I need to make you feel sorry for this offense, rather than having a further out goal in mind, the end game, of becoming more like Jesus, of developing the heart and the mind and the character, just out of anger. I just want to punish. And so let's talk just a little bit as we close today, just about the differences between punishment and discipline. And so if we could bring that slide up, let's look at this first one together. The difference between controlling behavior, focusing on behavior, is what punishment does, and discipline focuses on character. What does that look like?
So I think a lot of times when I am authoritarian, it's because I'm embarrassed by your behavior. And so I'm focused on your behavior, versus when I am in authoritative, when I'm being mindful and I'm really working here, I'm focused on what character traits do I want in you? What do I see when you're lying or when you're hitting or when you're aggressive? That's not the character I want in you. So what character do I want in you? So I'm focused on, and when I'm giving a discipline versus a punishment, I'm not just trying to stop the behavior. I'm going to keep the behavior from happening in the future by teaching you a new character trait that I want in you, versus now you're just so scared of that punishment, you're not going to repeat it.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay, what about the next one? Punishment expects to control, discipline expects to connect.
So punishment, again, I just want to control you. I want you to stop doing the things that I don't want you to do. Versus discipline, I'm trying to make a connection with you so you hear my heart, so that you understand why. Why are we trying to deal with whatever this behavior is? I am not trying to push you away and saying to you, well, you're bad, go over there and get out of my way. I'm saying to you, come here and let's talk and let's figure out what's going on in your heart. I want to connect with you and see, why did you do that? What was your reasoning behind that? And how do I teach you to do something different the next time?
Punishment uses fear to intimidate. Discipline uses love to motivate.
So I think a lot of times, what the mom look is and those kinds of things. That's definitely a little fear-based, and there's nothing wrong with the mom look. I think sometimes we have to use that in public until we can get in private and deal with the situation. But a lot of times, I even find myself, I'll stand up taller. My voice gets incredibly loud, and I am trying to use fear to make you obey me. I am trying to scare you. I am bigger than you. I am louder than you. Now just obey. Versus, I love you and I want you to obey me because I love you. I want you to trust me because I love you. That's a whole different thing. And again, you might have to use the mom look and when you're in a certain situation where you can't deal. But when we get to the car, when we get to wherever, let's have a talk. Let's talk about, you know what, I love you and I do not like to see that behavior in you. Let's talk about, what is the root of it and how do we get rid of it, and what are the consequences going to be for that behavior that you just had.
And I think an important verse that we can share here is 1 John 4:18. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. Fear can be a powerful motivator, but along with that, there's guilt and there's shame. Love is so much more powerful, what we're talking about here. We're talking about the idea of the gospel, that love and grace is so much more powerful. Fear is a motivator, but love is so much more powerful in what we're shooting for.
And when the thing that keeps me fearful is out of sight, then I'm not motivated to do the right thing. And I think that's the big difference. And I even think when you talk about, we're connecting this to the gospel, this is very much our relationship with Christ. If my motivation is to follow a set of rules because I'm fearful, that's only going to take me so far. When I decide that it's not so scary anymore, that, I did it 3 times and there was no consequence, then I'm just going to go ahead on with my behavior. The same goes for our children. But if I have a relationship with the one who's setting the consequences, setting the rules, then what drives me to obey is love and understanding that person's heart for me. And that's exactly, I need to understand God's heart for me. His longing for me is good. It's for my best. And that's what we want our children to understand. My longing for you is to give you the best, to protect you. And we're going to eventually transfer this whole thing to God. He becomes the one who is always an authority over them, because we're not even in the picture anymore. And so in order to do that properly, where they end up with the best relationship with the Lord, that motivator's got to be love, because that's the relationship I want them to have with Christ. It's not one of, I'm just so scared of him that he might strike me down at any time that I'm going to obey. I want them to understand that he loves them desperately. I want them to understand that I love them desperately, and I really want good for them.
That's really good. Let's go back to punishment versus discipline. How about punishment teaches the what, or the rules, and discipline teaches the why, the values?
Okay. So punishment is just basically saying, don't, do not. I don't want you to behave that way. And I have been...
and I think that's important.
Sure, there is value to that. I want my kids to not curse. I want my kids to not... But why? Why do I want them? It's taking that next step. It's okay to say, these things are wrong, don't do these things. But then we're going to go the next step and say, and this is why we aren't going to.
And that's important, the why behind the what. Punishment results in shame and guilt oftentimes, whereas discipline results in confidence and identity.
Especially for one of my children, we'll allow that child to remain nameless, but I see when I become very authoritarian and I'm just constantly going at them with rules, clean this up and quit doing that and stop this, they begin to just live in this kind of, I'm always wrong, I can't get anything right, versus when I say, hey, you know what, when we do it this way, this is the outcome of that, or a better explanation of why I want certain behaviors, or coming alongside and saying, here, you seem to keep forgetting to do this, let's do this together. That builds confidence. That builds, it makes this child more secure in my relationship with him, versus the opposite of that. It pushes him away from me. It keeps him from wanting to be near me, because I have constant, and again, that same feeling is with Christ. When I feel constant guilt and shame, I don't want to come into the presence of the Lord when I feel guilt and shame. There's going to be some guilt and shame, but I need to know on the other side of that, it's because of love. Absolutely. And that will drive me back. And that relationship that I know he absolutely loves me, he absolutely wants to be with me, will drive me back. And then I have confidence in that relationship with him.
Yeah. That identity in the gospel, in grace and mercy, and All right. What about punishment expects perfection, discipline expects growth?
I think a lot of times what we need to do, a lot of times the difference between being the authoritarian or even the permissive parent or, the uninvolved parent versus being the authoritative parent really comes in here. And it is taking a pause. When my child has whatever behavior it is, what is my expectation? For my 3-year-old, my expectation is one thing, and for my 14-year-old, my expectation is something totally different. Is my expectation right for their age? Did what they just, what they just did, was it intentional defiance, or was it just, they're just a little kid and they didn't think twice and they don't think like I do. And I'm not always really good at this. I'll react and then I think, I really could have handled that better because that wasn't intentional. They weren't out to be destructive, or they weren't out to make me mad. And so what I'm looking for is am I looking for perfection, or am I just looking, I want them to grow. I want them, the next time we come across this, maybe they'll mess it up, but they'll immediately say, oh, that was the wrong thing to do. I'm looking for them to do better next time versus, or I'm looking at them saying, oh, we should really already be here. So we have a growth issue here. We need to work on that character trait. We need to work on that area of your life because I'm not seeing the growth that I need to see versus I'm just looking for you to be absolutely, I can see you, but I cannot hear you. You should just be following the rules all the time. That's not what I'm necessarily looking for. Am I seeing in them the growth that I should see? Are they where they need to be for their age, for all of the things that are going on in their life? Are they where they're at? I'm really looking for that versus I'm just looking for this behavior.
Yeah. And then finally, punishment focuses on the short term, discipline focuses on the long term.
So I think I really want kids to just stop, especially when I'm in a public place. I'm really looking for the short term, just quit now, versus long term. I'm looking for when you're out of my sight, when you're with friends, when you're at school, are you going to still make the right choice? Have I given you the tools that you're in your mind before you make a choice, you're going to stop and say, is this what I really should be doing? Is this the right choice? Is this safe? Have I really given you those long-term skill sets, those long-term tools versus I just want you to stop right now. I really don't care what comes in the future. What are you really going for? And I think for most of us, a lot of time it is that short term. But again, that what we're looking for is intentional parenting. It's that focused parenting that says, okay, long term, what I'm looking for is this behavior and this reaction.
Yeah. So, I hope what we've shared with you tonight has maybe given you some new perspectives and maybe some new tools for parenting. And I will say that, Meredith and I fail as parents on a daily basis, and our kids fail us on a daily basis, and we fail God on a daily basis. But thank God, He loves us so much that He sent His Son Jesus to offer us on a daily basis forgiveness and new mercies every single day. And so wherever you are, I want to encourage you. You can start right where you are. You can go to God and you can say, I've been messing up in this area and I want to do this right. Every single day we have that opportunity to do it right, to start afresh and new because of the love and mercy and forgiveness of Jesus Christ. And so we want to encourage you tonight. And how about letting us just pray over you as parents as we close tonight? Meredith, would you pray for us?
Father God, we are just thankful that your mercies are new every single day for us, God, every minute, every hour, God. We need you. And this is a huge job, a huge undertaking as a parent, as a grandparent, as a teacher, whatever role we're playing in children's lives, God. And in our hearts, we long to be intentional. We long to lead children to you and to just be faithful to this calling that you've given us, Lord. but we fail, God, and we admit that failure now, and we ask now that you would forgive us and that you'd set us back on track, God, that we would commit daily to being intentional, to being in your word and filling ourselves full with your truth so that we are ready for the day, so that we are ready to do the things you've called us to do. We want to be faithful, and I just pray that you would help us to see where we're at, to be honest with ourselves, and then to see what we need to do to make those changes, that we would go even before our children and ask for forgiveness and admit our failures so that they can learn how to do that before you as well. Lord, it's never too late to make a change, and we are so grateful for that. And so I just pray that you would rain down on us, God, that mercy and that hope and the truth of who we are in you, God, and that we would pour that then into our children. Build those relationships between us and our children so that what we say will be truth to them. They will long to be what they've seen in us, God, that we would live lives worthy of that. We thank you and we love you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Meredith, for coming and sharing with us. And we love you, church, and have a great rest of the week.